During the Second World War, a very close ally of Adolf Hitler was his friend Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy. Together the pair formed an alliance that would unite both Nazi Germany and Italy under the Axis alliance, with both of the armies fighting alongside each other in many significant battles. To the Allies, Mussolini was a figure of hatred alongside Hitler, and towards the end of the conflict he was deposed and was ultimately executed by his own countrymen. His body was then displayed in public hanging upside down at a service station in Milan, and it was abused by the crowd who despised the former and deposed dictator. Mussolini's power within Italy was absolute for a period of time, and he became very powerful, but as he went on he did fall spectacularly from grace. Mussolini, like most politicians, had a significant number of dark secrets that he tried to cover up to ensure his reputation and legacy were not tarnished. He did have a number of mistresses, and this was well known, but to many Italians, he and his wife, Guidi, were a happy couple, along with their 5 children that were born. But a dark secret haunted Mussolini, and this was that he was already married. In fact, he was technically a bigamist, and this secret could have ruined his political career inside of Italy. But the story of his first wife, Ida Dalser, is incredibly tragic, and her death is incredibly suspicious, to the point where one can consider that Mussolini definitely had a role in it. Join us today as we look at the brutal execution of Mussolini's first wife, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Following Benito Mussolini's march on Rome in 1922, he was appointed to the position of Prime Minister of Italy, and remained in this until he was deposed in 1943. As a young man he was sent to a boarding school, where he was noted to have been violent and defiant, despite being also quite shy, but he achieved good grades and then avoided military service within Italy by moving to Switzerland. He worked in a number of different jobs in different Swiss cities, but he could not settle, and it was this characteristic that plagued his early years. He began to become involved in different groups and different Italian socialist groups, and he was involved in writing speeches for them. He worked as a secretary of the Italian Workers' Union and organised meetings, and even met Lenin at some point. Inside of Switzerland he was a troublemaker. He was then deported back to Italy, before he returned briefly, but in 1909 he left Italy to take a job as a secretary in Trento, which at the time was within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's not known whether Benito Mussolini met Ida Dalser whilst they were both in Trento around 1909 or not. Ida Dalser, who would become his first wife, was born in Sopramonte, a village close to Trento, and she was from a rather high-profile family inside of her settlement. Her father was a town mayor, and as a young girl she was sent to Paris to study cosmetic medicine. But after she finished her studies, she moved to Milan, and she opened a French-style beauty salon in the city, where a number of high-profile Italian women would go to. As mentioned, it's not known whether Ida Dalser and Mussolini met in Milan or Trento, but he did move to the city, and at some point the pair struck up a romantic relationship. Inside of Milan, Mussolini began and established a socialist newspaper, and it's believed that whilst working in her salon, Dalser gave him money to fund his new enterprise and business. It's claimed she fell so hard for him that she even sold her beauty salon, so Mussolini could continue to work on his newspaper. It's believed their relationship was fast, and that the pair were married in 1914, but Ida Dalser then quickly became pregnant. Mussolini's first wife gave birth to a son in 1915, named Benito Albino Mussolini, after his father. The boy would later serve inside of the Italian Navy during the Second World War, and would tell people of his famous father, the dictator of the country. Little is known about the marriage of Dalser and Mussolini, but there are records that state that the two did split up early on after their marriage, and that Mussolini was not keeping up his maintenance payments for his child, the son who bore his name. Because of this, he was taken to court and was ordered to maintain the payments to Ida Dalser, but following Mussolini's rise to power, most of the documents relating to his first marriage were destroyed. It's clear that Mussolini very quickly after the birth of his son had married his long-term mistress, Guidi, who the majority of Italy believed was his first wife. But there was no record of Mussolini obtaining an annulment or divorce from Ida Dalser, which meant he would have been technically a bigamist, something which would have destroyed his career in politics, living within the Catholic country. Following Mussolini leaving her, Ida Dalser was left without her business and was left penniless, and was outraged with the way she'd been treated by her husband. She claimed that she had proof that in 1915, Mussolini had taken bribes from the French government to try and influence Italy into becoming involved in the war against Austria-Hungary. But if this came to light, then Mussolini would have been ruined and would have been a traitor. After he came back from war in 1917, Mussolini began to take a more active role in politics, and he began to work on establishing and forming the National Fascist Party, and in the same year he was elected to the Chamber of Deputies. But after his march on Rome and seizure of power, there was a worry in his mind about his first marriage. He could not be seen as a bigamist, and this would have been very damaging to his reputation, and also he could not be seen as a deadbeat father who did not care or pay for his first child. Once he came into power, he ordered that Ida Dalser and her son were kept under very close watch and surveillance by the fascist police forces. Any paper evidence or trail that related to his first marriage and son was destroyed by the government officials and agents. Ida Dalser, though, would not remain silent. She continued to feel cheated by her husband, who now had control of the whole of Italy in his dictatorship. She was furious that her husband, who was now incredibly famous and wealthy, had thrown her aside and was continuously denying her existence and refusing to acknowledge his son. Dalser continued to maintain her position as the dictator's wife, and she even in public claimed he was a traitor, and Mussolini became aware of these rumours and dissent. She continued to maintain her position, saying he had accepted a bribe from the French government, but Mussolini then had enough of his first wife. He forced his son to change his surname to Bernardi, and then placed his son into a number of boarding schools, and he was taken away from his mother. Mussolini had the secret police arrest and abduct his first wife. Ida Dalser, whilst held in custody, was beaten badly and was then forced to wear a straitjacket after she was declared insane. Following this, she was then committed into an asylum against her wishes, but there was nothing really wrong with her. She was just telling the truth about her husband Mussolini, the dictator of Italy, who was a bigamist, a terrible father, and who was not what the Italian people saw. Records relating to Ida Dalser are incredibly hard to find, as most were destroyed, but in 1937, a few years before the Second World War broke out, it was said that Ida Dalser died of a brain hemorrhage at the age of 57. Now we can only speculate as to whether she actually died of this, or if there was some underhand means that occurred in relation to her death. It could be possible to reach the conclusion that Mussolini, who was at the pinnacle of his power, ordered his first wife to be killed by members of the staff inside of the psychiatric hospital. This would in a sense be an execution, as it was practically the arranged killing of an individual, and the fact she was incarcerated inside of a hospital was almost like a death sentence to her, whilst Mussolini was in power, and there was no chance of her getting out of hospital. Also, Mussolini, it can be considered, could be involved in the killing of Ida Dalser's son, his first child, and the son that bore his name, Benito Mussolini Jr. His son was allegedly killed on the 26th of August 1942, either being killed via a number of lethal injections which intended to induce a coma, or through electric shock therapy. For Mussolini, both his first wife and first son were a constant danger, and the fact his son was also kept under close surveillance and imprisoned inside an asylum where he died is rather suspicious. Ida Dalser, Benito Mussolini's first wife, had a miserable life following her meeting and falling in love with the future dictator of Italy. She would lose her beauty salon to fund his business ventures and would receive no thanks or gratitude for doing this. She played a pivotal role in his work inside of Milan before the First World War, but was met with condemnation and ill treatment after Mussolini came into power. Her being imprisoned inside of an asylum at the behest of her husband can be seen as the dictator of Italy condemning her, and it's interesting to read that all accounts of her death label the word brain hemorrhage with some form of suspicion. Whatever the case, meeting Mussolini was the worst thing that happened to Ida Dalser, as before she did this, she had a prosperous business in the thriving Milan. She died a woman with nothing, except the fact she knew the truth which would ultimately lead to her death. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.